Tonight, the Daryl Smith Diversity Lecture. For those of you that don't know Daryl, I doubt there's anyone in here that does not know Daryl and her fine reputation. She's a nationally recognized expert in all things diversity in higher education. This lecture series, this lecture will recognize Daryl's contribution over 27 years at CGU, her good work that really came to life fully through the work with the Irvine Foundation and the American Association of Colleges and Universities. A giant project, 28 private colleges and universities, really focusing on how to expand access and success for underrepresented students on those campuses. And she's done work with students and faculty and administration around critical issues of diversity in higher education. And she, while at CGU for those 27 years, has worked as a professor of education and psychology. Her research focuses on organizational applications of diversity, assessment and evaluation, leadership and change. Her latest, and really what I consider, Daryl, your signature work, Diversity's Promise for Higher Education, Making It Work. And this has had Daryl really on an international circuit over the last 2 years, much to the chagrin of your wife Barbara there that haven't been at home very much, but you've been very popular around the country and around the globe. And if you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it to you. Great reading. And we're delighted to be able to have this lecture in your honor, Daryl. Thank you very much for everything. Wow, so many faces that I haven't seen some of you in so long. New faces that are from the past popping up. So thank you all for coming out tonight. Shaun Harper, thank you for being here to give this first annual diversity lecture. And I couldn't think of a more fitting scholar to deliver tonight's talk. Shaun is an associate professor at the University of Pennsylvania. He directs the Center for the Study of Race and Equity in Education. He is perhaps, not perhaps, he's arguably the most well-recognized, the most active, most prolific scholar in the area of race and gender in higher education and social context and diversity. He takes a page from Daryl's book. There's a generational handshake here going on, and it's really an honor to have you, Shaun. Shaun's work has been recognized by American Educational Research Association with Early Career Awards. I'll note that Daryl has an American Education Research Association Career Award, and Daryl also enjoys an Association for the Study of Higher Education Lifetime Career Award. Shaun has received the Association for the Study of Higher Education Early Career Award. So there are a lot of parallels here, including the just sheer volume of scholarship, over 75 peer-reviewed publications and articles and other publications, 9 books, numerous editorial boards. He serves on my editorial board at the Journal of Higher Education. Thank you very much, Shaun. Over $1.3 million in funding for the good work that he does. And this good work is most recently captured in his own project and report coming out of the center, Succeeding in the City. And I'm sure that one or two things might be said about lessons drawn from this tonight as Shaun talks. There are handouts at the back in the table near the cookies, and I know the cookies might have distracted you from this wonderful lesson, but they are there. And that's about my 7 minutes. And Shaun, I want to thank you for coming to Claremont. And what I didn't mention is Shaun is with us at CGU as a visiting scholar. Shaun is on sabbatical. He's here this spring as a visiting scholar at CGU, and you bring great energy, warmth, and super ideas, and we look forward to engaging those ideas with you tonight. Welcome, Shaun Harper, to CGU.
So I think Dean Thomas, my friend, was predicting that I might be on a trajectory to grow up to be like Daryl G. Smith. I can only hope that that prediction comes true. I have the utmost respect for Daryl. She's made an appearance in a countless number of literature reviews of mine. I've been to many campuses that have been shaped by her extraordinary scholarship and by her presence, having been at those places engaged in the work of institutional and organizational change. My graduate students are well acquainted with the love affair that I have with the genius that is Daryl Smith, as I have required them to read volumes and volumes of her work over the years. So I must say that it is such a treat for me to have been invited to deliver this first lecture that is named for Daryl. Daryl, thank you so much. And thank you, Scott, for having me here, for extending to me the introduction to visit here at CGU this spring, and for such a lovely introduction to this lecture and the brevity with which you introduced me. I do appreciate that. I would like to take a moment to express my sincere gratitude to Professor Deborah Faye Carter, who is on the faculty here at CGU. Deborah was one of my professors at Indiana University, and she taught me much about higher education. In fact, it is quite likely that it was Deborah Carter who introduced me to Daryl Smith's work as a graduate student. So thank you so much, Deborah. Okay, so here we are for this first ever Daryl G. Smith lecture. I have decided to talk about the elusive quest for racial justice in U.S. higher education. I call it elusive because what I'm about to lay out is sort of a quest for something that we've never had, and that is true equity in U.S. colleges and universities. I will talk a bit about the realities of race on many campuses across the country. Those realities will be largely shaped by my research and findings that have emerged in my work and in Daryl's work and other people's work who've studied these topics. Some of them will also be some experiential realities that I will showcase in other ways. I'm then going to attempt here to engage in some reasoning, right? As we talk about why this quest for racial justice remains so elusive. There are reasons for it, and I will attempt to unpack and explain those reasons. Again, grounding much of my theorizing and explanations in mine and other people's research. And lastly, I will talk about what will likely feel to some people like a call for a revolution. I'm not so sure that that's what it is, but it may feel that way to some people. So why don't we start here with the realities. Before that, I do want to encourage you to be Twitter engaged. A hashtag has been created for this lecture, Smith Lecture. And do feel free to follow the Claremont Graduate University and me while you're tweeting. And for those of you who are not Twitter active, I suppose you can Facebook post. But I always enjoy, after these moments, going back and reading the feed and hearing what people were thinking and experiencing, perhaps even moments of dissonance for them throughout our conversation. So I encourage you to do that. So I'm going to start here. There's a UCLA doctoral student here, Hillary Zimmerman is her name, and she told me that I better bring it. So I'm going to try as hard as I can to bring it in honor of Daryl G. Smith. So why don't we start here by talking about what we know to be the realities of race.
A Cinco de Mayo south-of-the-border party off campus at University of Delaware. Students dressed as landscapers with Pedro and Jose name tags on their work shirts. Written on the back, Spick and Span Gardeners.
I was disgusted. I was surprised, shocked.
All three of the students photographed are members of a campus honor fraternity, a fact that outraged the university's Latino students after pictures of the party were posted on Facebook.com.
To know that my own peers have looked down upon the Latino community and see us in this manner and have called us derogatory terms, it was just shocking.
Other partygoers wore Mexico t-shirts. The back of one said, "full of tequila."
No matter how far we think that we're going, it seems like people are doing the same things over and over.
In recent months, students have been throwing racially themed parties across the nation. At California's Santa Clara University, white students dressed as Latino janitors, gardeners, and pregnant teens at a similar south-of-the-border party last February. At Clemson and University of Connecticut, so-called gangsta parties parodied African Americans. Why does this keep happening? Latino students here at the University of Delaware comprise just 4% of undergraduate enrollment. And as is the case at many schools, there tends to be a division between minorities and the majority white student body.
You can see groups of like Latinos are friends and then like groups of white kids are friends.
Segregation?
Kind of, but I don't think it's anything that's been sort of done on purpose. I think it's just how it naturally sort of evolved.
But University President David Rozelle says there is no excuse for offending Latino classmates, even if such behavior is protected by the First Amendment.
We certainly can't condone it. There's a question to the extent to which we can punish it.
The Phi Sigma Pi honor fraternity did exact punishment, expelling these 3 students for a year. And Latino students sponsored a campus town hall where one of the partygoers publicly apologized.
I did not mean it to be malicious at all. I really do care about this issue. You know, I did make a mistake, but I do care about what's going on.
Other students issued a written apology. More important than retribution, Latino student leaders say, is the fact that their classmates have had an important lesson on the danger of stereotyping. Alan Chernoff, CNN, Newark, Delaware.
The reality is, what you just saw happened last Monday on Martin Luther King Day at Arizona State University. Now, as you were watching it, the reporter mentioned that Latino students represent only a small share of the undergraduate student enrollment at University of Delaware. So some people may have thought, well, geez, in a place that is not as diverse, we would expect these kinds of things to happen. But surely Arizona State is considerably more diverse than is University of Delaware. The reality is that these kinds of parties, these kinds of parodies of people of color, students of color especially, happen on many college and university campuses. In fact, I've been working on a project that I started with a graduate student who was at Penn, who's now a PhD student at UCLA. Mike Ishimoto is his name, and another graduate student that we're calling the Day After study. This particular project entailed analyzing newspaper stories using discourse analyses the day after a racist event happened on a campus. So if you thought that what you saw in the video was horrifying, just imagine how horrifying the comments were that were posted in response to those videos, right? So for this particular study, we studied racial incidents that had happened on 12 different college and university campuses. You see them listed here. And we analyzed over 2,000 newspaper comments that were posted in response to coverage of the incident. What I want to highlight here as you look at this list, that the ones that are in blue are places where fewer than half of the undergraduate students are white. Right? So Sylvia Hurtado, Mitchell Chang, and others have reminded us through their great scholarship, Deborah Carter included, that simply having diversity on its own is insufficient. And having a diverse student body does not guarantee immunity to an institution from situations like you just saw in the video clip. So when I say that the places highlighted in blue they have a lower percentage of white students. So what you see on the whole list is some real variance here in the representation of students of color and white students. For example, at Murray State, University of Alabama, and University of Missouri, white students are 80% of the undergraduate student body. However, at UC San Diego, they're just 24%. At University of Pennsylvania, where I teach, white students are 46% of the undergraduate student body. So again, the point here is that simply having more students of color without the conditions that will promote learning, cross-racial understanding, and so on is insufficient, as evidenced obviously by the horrifying things that were posted in response to these news stories. I will give you an example from my own campus. So a couple years ago, Chris Abrea was a senior at University of Pennsylvania. Chris was out late on a Saturday night and had an encounter with some drunk white students who were in a fraternity, right? And these students were asking him really racially offensive, racially loaded and stereotypical questions like, hey man, do you know where we could buy weed? Or we're kind of hungry. Do you know where we could get some fried chicken, right? So they were like really taunting this guy. Now this is at a place that is one of the most diverse, and dare I say, perhaps even one of the most elite universities in the country, right? This happened to this student at my university. So Chris wrote a column in the student newspaper on Monday morning recapping what had happened, right? But only a sliver of Chris's column was about the actual incident. What Chris did was situate his narrative in sort of a larger set of racial microaggressions and racialized experiences that he and other students of color had at Penn, right? So people were posting all sorts of very interesting things in response to Chris's story. For example, one person said, how do you know the race of the people who approached you, right? So this person went on to sort of suggest that Chris, who was crying racism, was behaving in a racist manner himself by naming the people white. How did he know they were white? The person said. You said in the column that it was dark, that it was late. So how do you even know that these were white students? You, sir, are behaving in a racist manner. So this, in fact, re-victimized Chris, right? Chris was the victim here, but this particular person who posted this particular comment attempted to divert attention from the realities of race and, again, sort of ask Chris, well, how did you know? Now, before I go to the next comment, and I swear these are not the two most ridiculous comments that I chose to share with you. This next one, I think, warrants just a little bit of explanation. Penn has 12 colleges and schools. One of those is the College of Liberal Studies. It is, in fact, true that the College of Liberal Studies is the place where many returning adult learners apply and they enter through that college to access a Penn education. I think it's one of the most important colleges on the Penn campus for that reason. So I think that's important for you to know. So Chris was, in fact, in the College of Liberal Studies. So one person posted, from which I understand is targeted at adult students. Perhaps the fact that he looks older led the white students he encountered to challenge his status of belonging. So I guess it's fine to pose these incredibly racist questions to an older black person, right? Sure, that has to be why they didn't think this guy belonged, because he looked older. Well, what you should also know about the College of Liberal and Professional Studies at Penn is that it is also the place where students who cannot find a major that satisfies their needs and interests can actually design their own major through that college. Yeah, Chris was 21 when this happened, not 41. But the point here, right, is that, there's some sense making among these students who were posting this that must be the reason why, right? And I would argue that it's not those students' fault altogether. I'm going to unpack that in a moment. Now, those kinds of stories that I just shared with you are not at all uncommon. So as I traveled the country to do campus racial climate research, sometimes universities hire me to come and assess the campus climate. I hear things from students of color and white students like the following. You see gays hanging out only with gays, Asians only with Asians, white fraternity and sorority members only hanging out with each other. It is segregated. So one reality of race on many college and university campuses regardless of how racially diverse they are, it says students are still balkanized in groups. Students still cluster very much along racial and ethnic lines, right? That is a reality that I see, that I know Daryl sees and has acknowledged in her work. It is a reality, right? Another reality is that students of color, particularly blacks and Latinos, Native Americans, lower income Asian American students, on many campuses feel like there's very little for them there, right? Sure, there may be the one resource center that's often underfunded, understaffed, that is expected to do all the programming that is targeted at that particular group to make them feel like they belong. But in many focus groups, in many interviews during these campus racial climate visits, we often hear students ask, how can the university claim to care about us but give us nothing? Give us the scraps. Put the Black Cultural Center in the basement where no one can find it, or on the periphery of campus. Those kinds of things convey to students that they are unimportant and that the institution is not theirs and that they don't belong. That is a reality. Another is so this is from the last place I was at, which is a predominantly white private research university in the Southeast. So that sort of narrows it down considerably. Duke, Vanderbilt, Emory, one of those, right? I won't say which one. But at this particular place, white students, and this is a place that in fact has a demographic profile that is a lot like Penn. White students are less than half of the undergraduate student body there. But students, during our visit there, said the place feels like it's 90% white. Although it's just 40-something% white, there's a pervasiveness of whiteness that is embedded in the curriculum, that is embedded in the artwork that we see in every building that we enter. In fact, in one building on this campus, where the president's office is, when you walk in, there are these portraits of the previous presidents and lots of other important people. And as it turns out, every single one of those people is white. Like not 90% of them, 100% of the faces on that wall are white. So that conveys to students that even in a place that is as diverse as this particular unnamed place in the Southeast, it makes it feel like it's 90% white, right? So these are part of the experiential realities for many students of color, right? And those students oftentimes feel a sense of responsibility, or dare I say even a burden, to take this on behalf of the institution. We need not look further than Westwood, where students at UCLA recently posted a provocative video in response to their experiential realities. And these were black male students over at UCLA. One thing that I think is important to acknowledge, and they talk about this in the video, that black men were only 1.1% of undergraduates, but nearly half of the football and basketball players at UCLA in 2013, right? When that happens, one byproduct of that is a presumption that every black dude on the campus must be a football player, or that every black dude there isn't smart. He's not serious about his academics, right? Another experiential sort of byproduct is that these guys very rarely see other people who look like them, right? So that happened there. And that video that they've posted as of about an hour and a half ago has gotten over 1.7 million views on YouTube. These are students, undergraduates, who've taken on the burden of making public their experiential realities with the racial climate there and their racial underrepresentation. Now, one reality there is that, and I've written about this recently in an article I published in the Review of Research and Education. One reality is that students of color, on top of doing everything else that other college students are asked to do, like study, go to class, go to events in their residence halls and that sort of stuff, they must commit a portion of their time to teaching each other how to survive in these places. So in this particular article, I used data from my National Black Male College Achievement Study that highlight this practice that I call peer pedagogies. It's peers teaching peers about the realities of race on predominantly white campuses, and peers teaching peers how to successfully navigate the racial climate on their campuses. Now, this data from this particular study was drawn from 42 colleges and universities in 20 different states across the country. I went to each of these places and interviewed black undergraduate men who were extremely engaged, both inside and outside the classroom. These were guys who had really good grades. They had done things like study abroad and summer internships in their fields and so on. These were guys who were going to graduate school. So we're talking successful black male students, right? 30 of those 42 campuses were predominantly white institutions. In fact, Pomona College and Claremont McKenna were two of those places from which data were collected for this study. Occidental College was another one of them. Kendris Watson was an undergraduate student there at Occidental at the time and was a participant in that study. Thank you for making my career. He's here, actually. So there were 219 face-to-face individual interviews with these undergraduate students, 183 from the predominantly white institutions. So this whole peer pedagogies article was drawn from the 183 students at predominantly white institutions. So I want to recap for you a discussion that I had with one of the participants in the national study. As you can see, we were in a white room that had nothing on the walls. There were no windows or anything, but there was a lovely table between him and me, right? So here's just a sliver, just a snapshot, an excerpt of my conversation with this student. I'm not going to say where he's from, but I will tell you that he was not from Pomona College or Claremont McKenna, so, right? So I asked him, there was a portion of the interviews where I wanted to get a sense of the influence and imprint of faculty members on their success, right? So I asked this particular participant in the study, tell me about an extraordinary teacher you've had here. He said, her name is Brandy. She is truly extraordinary. So then I said, oh, well, what classes have you taken with her? And he said, classes? Oh, my bad. I didn't realize you were asking about an actual professor. Now, I assure you that these were very smart guys. But in this moment, I thought to myself, well, what the heck did he think I was asking about? I asked him to name an extraordinary teacher who had had a serious influence on his experience. And he didn't realize I was talking about an actual professor. I did mention that this was not a Pomona or Claremont McKenna student, right? So then I said, oh, well, who is Brandy? And he said, she's a leader in the black student community here. She's the person who taught me and a whole lot of other students of color how to navigate this place, how to survive this place. She is the best teacher that I've had here. Were it not for her, I wouldn't still be here. Were it not for her and other people like her who've shown me the ropes, who introduced me to the realities of this place when I was a first-year student, I wouldn't have survived, this guy said. Right? So one reality is that students of color at many predominantly white institutions have to spend a portion of their time educating their peers how to survive. Another reality is that at these particular 30 predominantly white institutions in this study, the black student to black faculty ratio was 43-1. So it also means, for folks like me, I'm the first and only person of color who's ever been hired in my department at Penn. It then means that in addition to publishing and teaching and doing the things that are really important, that I also have to commit a portion of my time to helping students of color successfully navigate Penn. in other predominantly white institutions from across the country. Those students somehow find me and they contact me and need help, right? That's a reality for students of color and faculty of color. I do want to talk just a little bit more, though, about the realities for faculty of color. And to do that, I'm going to use one of the 9 themes from mine and Sylvia Hurtado's 2007 piece. We don't have time for me to walk through all 9 of the themes, but it was that 8th theme that I thought particularly interesting and useful here. And it was what we call the consciousness powerlessness paradox. What do we mean by that? In fact, let me just tell you just really quickly here, just a little bit about sort of the methods for this study. So data for this particular study were collected at 5 predominantly white institutions in 3 different geographic regions of the country. And it entailed focus groups with undergraduate students, white students, as well as students of color. They were racially homogeneous focus groups. And we were trying to get a sense of the campus racial climate, the extent to which students interact across difference, and so on. In addition to the student focus groups, there were nearly 300 of those. The study also included on each of the campuses a focus group with administrators. Now, we didn't ask for administrators of color when we were setting up these visits. We just said we want 10 or so administrators who could join us for a 2-hour focus group, who can also weigh in on the realities of race on the campus. Well, as it turns out, all but 3 people across these 5 campuses who showed up for these focus groups were people of color, which signifies for us that the work of diversity is often seen as people of color's work, right? So, about this consciousness powerlessness paradox. Given the composition of those focus groups, the administrators of color on these campuses said to us almost verbatim what the students said to us in our focus groups with them. In fact, they were well acquainted with the experiences of students. They were fully conscious of the realities of race, but yet they felt absolutely powerless to do anything about it. Because in many instances, they were the only person of color in their department, or there were people of color who had done this work of disrupting and naming before, who were reprimanded, demoted, fired, pushed out, marginalized. I think some of that is captured in this quote from one of the participants who said, "Everybody around this table knows how segregated students are, but we never talk about it. It's the sort of thing that will piss the upper administration off and make them leery of you for raising the issue. They will fire you," this participant said to us. So one reality of race is that people of color, oftentimes faculty and administrators of color, we grapple with what William Smith and others have called racial battle fatigue. We get tired of being the only person of color who's always raising these issues, who feels like we're losing, a winless battle, and so on. That is a reality. Okay, so before depression ensues over this audience, I'm going to now move on, and we're going to escape reality, right? And I'm going to attempt now to do some reasoning, some explaining about why these realities are so pervasive. I'm going to start here with an article that 2 friends and I published in the Journal of Higher Education. I've not since gotten anything else published in the Journal of Higher Education. The editor's a real stickler. Yeah. So I love this piece, right? So in this particular article, we do sort of an analysis of the condition and status of Black people throughout the lifespan of American higher education. And at one point, we thought about naming this article 3 Steps Forward, 2 Steps Back, because we thought that it really, sort of captured how there were these progressive steps in policy making toward access and equity for African Americans, but there have been some real regression in those things. But one reality that really helps explain the durability of all of the issues that I just talked about is that almost all of these predominantly white institutions were built for people other than us. So we say in the article that it was ingrained into the fabric of education that African Americans did not possess the mental capacity to learn, nor had we any real need for formal education. The U.S. was founded on racist principles that have permeated systems upon which it currently functions, right? So, we have over 300 years of evidence to suggest that the foundation of American higher education was not built for the diversity that's represented in this room. That was never fully dealt with. There have been pioneering scholars like Daryl Smith and many others over the decades who have been writing about these things, but the record was never righted, right? The record was never made right from the foundation of U.S. higher education. That is one explanatory factor for our current conditions. Another is captured, I think, in a set of examples that I want to give here. So here's a short video clip that I'm going to use to sort of walk us into this next portion here.
Now, people of a certain age certainly remember times of great racial conflict in this country, a divide that seemed pretty much impossible to bridge. And 60 years ago, researchers used a simple doll test to see how children view race, seeing their reaction to black and white baby dolls. Well, CNN has commissioned now a new study, a second doll test, if you will. Our Anderson Cooper takes a look at the results.
There are lots of different colors for skin.
I have questions for you about these pictures of different children.
After I read the question, I want you to
Point to the picture that fits the story.
Are children colorblind in America?
show me the smart child.
Show me the mean child.
Can you show me the dumb child?
Show me the nice child.
Is bias measurable even at an early age?
Why is she the bad child?
Because she's black.
And why is he the ugly child?
Because he looks like he's white.
Why is he the dumb child?
Because she has dark brown skin.
Why is she the bad child?
Because she makes fun of everybody else's skin color.
How much do kids learn from what they see and hear from adults?
Show me the child who has the skin color most adults like.
And show me the child who has a skin color most adults don't like.
These are questions that we, along with CNN's Soledad O'Brien and a team of psychologists hired by CNN, spent months investigating through tests, interviews with children and their parents. But they're questions that have been asked for decades. The first doll study ignited controversy in the 1940s when psychologists Kenneth and Mamie Clark pioneered studies in the effects of segregation in schools by asking African American kids to choose between black and white dolls. The so-called doll test found black kids overwhelmingly preferred white over black. Those results were at the center of the landmark 1954 Supreme Court case Brown versus the Board of Education that desegregated American schools. Now, with the first African-American president and nearly 60 years after segregation was overturned, we wondered, where are we today? How do kids see differences in race? What we discovered might shock you, but first, how we got there.
Skin color, child skin color estimate.
Okay, yeah.
We asked renowned child psychologist and University of Chicago researcher Dr. Margaret Beal Spencer to design a pilot study for CNN and analyze the results.
Our children are always near us, because we're a society. And what we put out there, kids report back. You ask the question, they'll give you the answer.
Spencer's team tested more than 130 kids in 8 schools with very different racial and economic demographics. Half of the schools were in the north, half in the south.
Oh, nicely done.
While the country is much more diverse today than in the 1940s, The children in this project are from 2 age groups and 2 races, white and black, to better allow comparison to the original doll study. 4 and 5-year-old children were asked a series of questions about these images. 9 and 10-year-old children were asked questions about the same images as well as this color bar chart. The tests led us to 3 major findings. First, white children as a whole responded with a high rate of what researchers call white bias, identifying the color of their own skin with positive attributes and darker skin with negative attributes.
Show me the dumb child.
Dumb child.
Okay, why is she the dumb child?
Because she has black skin.
Show me the mean child. Why is he the mean child?
Because she's brown.
Show me the bad child. Why is he the bad child?
Because he is black.
Okay. Show me the ugly child. Why is he the ugly child?
Because he's brown, black.
Show me the child who has the skin color most adults like. And show me the child who has the skin color most adults don't like. Show me the child who has the skin color most children like. Show me the child who has the skin color most children don't like. Show me the child who has the skin color most girls want. Show me the child who has the skin color most girls don't want.
The questions that got overwhelmingly white-biased answers?
Show me the dumb child.
About 76% of the younger white children pointed to the 2 darkest skin tones.
Show me the mean child.
About 66% of the younger white children pointed to the 2 darkest skin tones.
Show me the child who has the skin color most children don't like.
Again, about 66% of the younger white children pointed to the 2 darkest skin tones.
Show me the bad child.
More than 59% of the older white children pointed to the 2 darkest skin tones. But some white children did have more race-neutral responses.
So could you show me the good-looking child? So what are you thinking? I know you pointed to them all, but tell me what you're thinking.
I'm thinking that I do not care if they are black, white, mixed, or any kind of race. I think that it matters who they really are.
Well, coming up, I'm going to show you how the African-American kids answered some of those same questions. Stay here.
So as I attempt here to explain the durability of these issues in higher education, I want to take this back to childhood, to what you just saw, right? Each of us has a racial history. Each of us has a racial upbringing, right? So just imagine for a moment that these 4 and 5-year-olds that you just saw, that nothing happens along their educational trajectories to dismantle the ways that they've been socialized to think about the racial other. I don't think that's part of the Common Core standards. So I'm not sure that that's going to make its way into curricula in their K-12 schooling experiences. So then they come to us, right? They come to college. So here's where I'm going to just make a quick departure to tell a quick story. A couple years ago, I gave a talk at an elite liberal arts college. I'm neither confirming nor denying that it was one of the 5 C's. But it was certainly one that was like one of the 5 C's. One of the best liberal arts colleges in the country. The place really prided itself on that. So the dean of students there invited me to come and give a talk about race to undergraduate students. And as it turns out, the audience was about, I would predict, maybe about 95% white. So this was great, right? It was a great engagement. The room was very much like this one. During the Q&A portion of my time there was a young man in the audience who had a question. So as he was framing his question, he said to me, "Professor Harper, why is it that colored people do this?" And I can't quite understand why coloreds do that. And could you maybe tell me a little bit more about why you coloreds, so on and so forth, right? So 3 times during his framing, this student said colored. That engendered some real, distress for me, right? So, I am a teacher at heart. So I seized the opportunity to use this as an educational moment. So before responding to his question, I said to him in a non-threatening, non-agonizing, I didn't, whatever. I said to him, you do realize that calling people of color colored is quite problematic, right? And I saw a look on his face. It was not a look of resistance. It was a look of surprise. In fact, he confirmed the look by jumping in and saying, well, actually, no, I didn't know that. A confession that he made, in front of a room of his peers. We're going to talk a bit about confessions in a moment. But he said this, I didn't know. So I thought to myself, dude, are you serious? So then, I very quickly sort of gave a racial history here about the baggage that is connected with the word color. So he got it, right? So at the end of it, lots of people came up to the podium to say very nice things to me, which I hope you will do when this is over. Almost all of them apologized for this guy. These were his peers, right? And they were like, oh, Professor Harper, we're so embarrassed. That that was just such an ignorant question. It's really bad, right? So the guy himself actually came up to the podium. And he was so apologetic. And he said to me, I had no idea that calling people of color, which signified to me that he actually learned, right? That I had no idea. He mentioned that, he grew up in a very segregated place. Professor Gary Orfield's work and other people's work suggests that many youth today grow up in very segregated places, including those who live in cities, right? So this student said, I grew up in a racially segregated place, and honestly, my only interaction with people of color was on television. So no one ever taught me, and people in my family called them colored, so I didn't know. And I was like, dude, it's fine, stop apologizing, it's all good. So then, I tried to lighten the conversation by engaging him, sort of more personally. And I asked him, I was like, yeah, so, you're I was like, all right, so you're a student here. What year are you? This was in March. This guy was a graduating senior, graduating in May, who was about to leave his college and enter the world thinking that it was just fine to call people of color colored. Imagine what else the college neglected to teach him and his peers, right? Let's take this a step further. Let's imagine that that particular guy was going to go on to graduate school. And let's say he wanted to, he read Daryl's work and was really inspired or something. Well, no, he couldn't have read Daryl's work and said color. So bad example. But let's just say he read some professor's work and was inspired and he wanted to become a professor. So the guy graduates in May and then goes on to grad school, right? Well, does it happen there? Is that the point at which the ways in which he was socialized, he and others, when they were 4 and 5 years old, is it finally going to happen in graduate school where their deeply problematic socialization is going to be disrupted? Well, yeah, no, some recent research that me and my team of graduate students at Penn have been doing suggests that not so much. Not so much. In fact, one would presume that the likeliest place that it would happen in a graduate program might be in education, right? So this particular project is what we call the Race and Student Affairs Study. It's a study of what graduate students learn about race, racial realities, racial justice, racial strategies. What we mean by racial strategies is that you graduate from this program and you go to work at a university, and here are these data that suggest that there are sweeping gaps and inequities. Where did you learn in your master's program how to deal with those? So the research was conducted at these 14 with students from these 14 graduate programs. We picked these because they are arguably among the largest producers of folks who enter the student affairs profession. My alma mater, Indiana University, is one of them, right? So 86 master's students and 32 PhD students. PhD students were the second phase of this, and we wanted folks who were very serious about, who were near the end of their programs and were about to enter the academic market. They wanted to be professors. So we wanted to know, all right, something goes down in your course next year. What did you learn at USC that's going to teach you how to deal with that, right? What we learned here in this project is that even in programs that are as progressive as higher ed and student affairs programs, that students learn about people of color in their student development course. You know, those theories from the 70s and 80s that essentialize students and put them in boxes and stages and statuses. They learn that. They might come across an occasional reading about, you know, campus racial climate, but yeah, on the whole, they were not being prepared to deal with the realities of race on the campuses they were about to enter as professionals. So therefore, it should surprise us not that we see these realities, because the people who work at these places were never prepared to responsibly and effectively confront them. Part of their preparation could in fact be explained by what they read or didn't read. I'm going to talk for just a second here from an article that I titled Race Without Racism. And it was an analysis of 255 articles that were published in 7 major journals in higher education and student affairs, and 2 of them were community college journals. You see 5 of them listed, or 4 of them listed there, and there were 3 others. I took a decade of scholarship, articles published in these 7 journals that were either about campus racial climates or assorted racial differences, so racial differences, say, in student engagement, or racial differences in promotion and tenure, so on and so forth, right? Or the articles were about the experiences of people of color in higher education. So these articles were decidedly, in some way, about race. But very rarely the authors attribute what they found to racism or racist institutional structures, policies, and practices. Instead, they did a lot of theorizing about, you know, what could have been the explanatory undercurrents for, you know, these racial gaps and bad experiences that people of color were having and so on. In the interest of time, I'm just going to give you 2. Now, this particular one study was an analysis of racial differences in undergraduate student academic performance. So the authors in the discussion section of that article suggested that the lower GPA for blacks may result from their disadvantaged educational backgrounds, which for sure plays into and helps keep alive deficit notions of black students' intellectual competence, right? Now, it could in fact be true that maybe at the institutions in this particular data set that black students may have come from lower performing high schools. It could have been true, right? Lots of theorizing happens in the discussion section of an article. But could it also be that their GPAs were lower because they were encountering racial microaggressions in every class they took? Or because on top of studying and doing everything else that everybody else was doing, they also had to teach their peers of color how to successfully navigate the place, which is another job, right? It could be. But these particular authors were not making sense of these racialized findings in ways that attributed any of this to racism. Now, another study was an analysis of racial differences in faculty members' productivity, where faculty members publish. So it was both about how much they published and where their work was placed. They found that faculty members of color didn't have the publication productivity that their white counterparts had, and so on. So they suggested in the discussion section that blacks may have greater financial burdens than whites of comparable income levels, leading to greater pressure to spend their time in paid summer teaching. So in other words, black faculty are so poor and they come from such low-income backgrounds that while their white counterparts are spending the summer being productive and publishing, that we have to teach for money. Well, okay, well, maybe, I don't know, maybe, right? But yeah, could it also be that, yeah, by the time summer comes around, racial battle fatigue for sure has gotten the best of me, and I don't feel like doing anything? That could be one thing. Or could it also be that all of the journals and all of the editorial boards are largely controlled by white folk who don't understand the scholarship that these faculty members of color are producing, and they devalue it and reject it, and people can't get their stuff published in these things, in these places? Could that also be? It could be, right? Maybe. Maybe. The point here is that students in these graduate programs read these things from these journals that I just shared with you, right? So that helps socialize them to, one, thinking about and writing about and avoiding conversations about race in a particular way, right? Across these articles, people would often talk about chilly climates. Yeah, no, when I'm doing research with Latino students and Native Americans and other students of color, they're not talking about the climate feels chilly. They call it flat out racist, and that it's racism that they experience. That's what they say to me, right? But that's not the way that we socialize newcomers to our field to make sense of these things. So here goes, in my final minutes here, here goes the revolution. So I call it a revolution because I'm afraid that the ideas and proposals that Daryl Smith put forward in her 27 years on the faculty here at CGU would likely be deemed revolutionary. Now, I already said to you that I have the utmost respect for Daryl and her scholarship. I think her proposals are quite sensible. I think they make sense, right? I think they're smart, they're sensible. Some people might, in fact, deem them revolutionary, though, because you're asking for something that U.S. higher education has never had. In your book, you ask us to make it work. Well, what does making it work look like? Well, you tell us in the book, in fact, what making it work looks like, right? If only people would do what you called for in this book, we could revolutionize the realities of race on many campuses across the country. We also suggest that color-conscious leaders refuse to be convinced that there's a shortage of qualified candidates. They send the search committee back to find them when they come with the excuse that there are none, right? Leadership is important here. So is teamwork, right? Like, it can't just be the leader. The leader has to be the leader, but people have to also be engaged, right? So I'm about to conclude here, and I'm going to just very quickly here share two quick examples from a report that I've been writing since I've been out here as a visiting scholar at CGU. It's just been lovely, the 80-degree temperatures and everything. I've been quite inspired. I've done some of my best writing here. But the second week of March, the center I direct at Penn is releasing this report that will describe in incredible detail how 5 institutions rolled up their sleeves and assumed institutional responsibility for student success. Now, in this particular instance, it's for black male student success, right? But I want to share with you sort of the spirit of the work they did. These were boundary-spanning teams that were comprised of cabinet-level administrators, tenured faculty members, black male undergraduate students, colleagues from student affairs, so really a team that represented the fullness of the institution. They refused to accept and part of their refusal was because I made them refuse, to accept as an excuse that it's student effort, why these students aren't doing well or whatever, right? They engaged themselves in some honest questions about their own practices and so on. One of the institutions in the project is the Community College of Philadelphia, where for many years, black male students talked about their experiential reality in the classroom, that they felt oozing from the faculty members low expectations and a set of stereotypes, right? That they were pretty sure that faculty members thought that they all were thugs from North Philadelphia who had guns in their backpacks. So for many years, the college's response to that was to focus on the student, right? So if we could fix the student, so they literally said to these guys, hey man, if you would just maybe put on a button-down shirt and some slacks, then they wouldn't confuse you for those other black guys, right? Which was not dealing with the problem. So in this particular project, they have decided to fix the faculty by raising faculty consciousness about the implicit biases and racial stereotypes that they have about black males in general and black people, black males in particular, black people in general. That has been extraordinary. It's been an extraordinary shifting, right, of the frame. Another is UCLA, where the team created a course for black male first-year students to acclimate them to the campus. So instead of sending them out looking for resources on this sprawling place, right? I mean, UCLA is quite sprawling, right? Instead of sending the 1.1% out looking for resources and support, they created a course for first-year students that brought the support and the supportive people who deliver those services to the students. Over 3 years, only one student who's taken that course did not return for a sophomore year. Only one. Right? So that sounds revolutionary to some, I suppose, but it's just good old teamwork and collaboration and intentionality. The kinds of things that Daryl's written about throughout her career. The last thing that I'm going to argue here that we certainly need a lot more than the few examples that I just gave you, but one last thing that we need here is more people like Daryl Smith. And let me be more precise. We need more white people who are willing to get very serious about the important work of diversity and institutional change. It cannot be just Deborah and me. Right? We need more white people with power, with influence, and with connections to partner with Deborah and me to help make institutional change a reality. And for that, Daryl, I will be forever grateful. Thank you.